now. This is my first meetup I've ever done, and I am a big DBT fangirl. I've been using it for many years. Mostly I've used it with Looker. So 5 years, 3 different companies building the DBT in Looker and Looker ML. I joined Recce first week of March, so I was excited. You'll see on the other slide, it was the first time I actually got to use dbt semantic layer, which I've been wanting to do for years. But, you know, when you are a first hired startup or in a startup, you don't get to do what you actually want to do, you do what the company needs. So refactoring when we already had Looker was not a need. So agenda today is we'll kind of go through like the what and the why of a semantic layer, like why would you want one, what it is. Then we'll get into the Looker to dbt semantic layer, kind of talking about the principles I've seen that transfer over well, a little bit of a compare contrast. And then kind of the meat of this talk is actually structuring a practical semantic layer. So this is supposed to be very accessible. It's meant for the semantic layer curious, those that are maybe struggling to do that in their own companies. Very much grounded in issues I've had building semantic layer with Looker ML, as well as like how that translates now to the dbt semantic layer. Oh no. Code examples, because I really want to focus on the structure here. And then Q&A. So what is a semantic layer and why do you want one? Curious how many of us in this room have had the question, why don't X, active users in this dashboard match? Oh no, it's not up there. It didn't switch. All right, the dreaded question. Not why isn't AirPlay working? It's like, why don't these numbers match, right? So like, for example, active organizations between, one dashboard, an ad hoc query, and a Google Sheet, right? Because no one's ever actually using that one dashboard you built. Dashboard A, dashboard B, some notebook, or like MRR, so monthly recurring revenue, right? You see it a lot. That'll be in like some Excel notebook, the board deck from last month, and then a dashboard. And here's a date mismatch issue. We've seen that a lot. We forgot to include some variable Z from the where clause, typically some type of filter, right? That's where they're not getting, maybe they're not filtering out active, they're not filtering out, whatever it is your company cares about. Or they're sourcing from outdated or deprecated definitions, right? Especially in like some of these board decks for your reporting KPIs. So the semantic layer is a big fix for that. That's one of the big reasons you want to adopt it. It is a single source of truth for your business to find metrics. You can see here, I just pulled this from dbt's website. You have your data stack down here, your data warehouses, data lakes. It sits between your data warehouses and then all of your kind of end user facing tools. So that's going to be your Looker, your Tableaus isn't very great, but like Looker, Tableaus, CPEX, whatever you want to do, Jupyter Notebooks. dbt also works with Google Sheets, so that's another thing you can tie into, as well as any observability or other data apps. So it's a way of making sure, instead of having to define in each individual query, notebook, BI tool, or Excel sheet, that everything is consistent here, right? You can build tables, but the tables don't necessarily aggregate up in the way you want, especially with self-serve metrics. So again, that's why the semantic layer, not just tables. It makes your life easier, where I mentioned single source of truth, the consistency, the self-serve reporting, because you also are giving them a curated selection. These are just things that they should care about, these singular 5 metrics, 10 KPIs, versus having whole access to the tables that include the intermediate metrics that would go into building these, right? The AI-friendly potential. So right now, a lot of buzz around AI. One of the things that semantic layer will do is it gives that AI a lot of context. So it can actually give you, when you're doing queries, text to SQL, it knows what it's doing. It knows what to join on what can't join, and how to aggregate metrics up. And also just the data is more accessible to end users. It's legible in a language they can understand, which for a lot of us, and I talk about this later on, we are having to think about a modern data stack more and more as a product, and we ourselves are building products for end users, our PMs, the finance team, versus actually infrastructure or plumbing. Like we are now having to internally even do sales. Right here. This is where really, I think the big change point where it starts to become the product, your internal data. So, kind of touched on this already, get ahead of my slides. Examples of this, what I mean specifically for us is like a PM is pulling metrics from a semantic layer to like pitch a new feature, right? So they're accessing the BI tool, they're pulling it in a query. Your finance team is building forecasts off of metrics that you architected with them, right? Or an executive is copying and pasting from your dashboards into an investor update, right? These are things that we don't always think about, but we are building products. Our data is the product, and our customers are these people that are using them to make decisions, right? Cool. So moving into like the looker ML into the dbt semantic layer. I was in YC's under 24 batch, and that was the pitch that got me in. I'm no longer at the company. Recce is not that, but that is how I got in. Pure hatred alone, basically. But I had a champion at a bunch of companies, right? I didn't have an alternative, and there's a certain type of self-loathing that comes from that. Looker has been like best in class for so many years. It was one of the first to really do a semantic layer at scale, make it developer friendly, make it version controlled. And one of the big benefits, and we'll talk about how dbt differs, is it's been so tightly integrated with the data visualization layer, right? So this is important because the semantic layer, where it really matters, is where people use it. Where do they use it? They use it in visualization spaces. But Looker sucks for so many reasons. Not much product development or good documentation. Google has started to invest in it a little bit, but like most companies, if Google acquires you, your development dies. Opinion, spicy take. And I also found just personally a lot of users, and again, I've used this at 3 separate companies, right? So this isn't like team dependent, this isn't people dependent. I've gotten feedback that's just scary, like that's a direct quote, and unintuitive, right? And if we think about ourselves as we're building product for customers, that's not what we want to hear from our like customers thinking about they can't actually access our data, right? Again, why I could finally do this and get into the dbt semantic layer is Recce's data stack's a greenfield. We're an 8-person company, right? They don't have anything for me to mess up, and because we're building analytics engineering infrastructure as our product, it's worth time to invest in this, right? I'm still wearing like 20 different hats, but one of my hats is to make sure we have best in class, which for me means dbt semantic layer. With the semantic layer, I think it's really personally important to own your own metadata, especially as AI becomes more and more important. The semantic layers have to do that. Cool. Commonalities between Looker. If you are a Looker user, raise your hand. I want to know. We got 1, we got 2. All right, I'm going to breeze over this part. There's not many of us in the crowd. But commonalities. Semantic layer will feel like you're recoding what you already coded. That's just like how it works with semantic layers, because you have to define this is a measure. You need to tell the semantic layer what this is, how it gets aggregated, what is a dimension, and in that sense, you will really just feel like you're duplicating work. That's just the same across all of them. You need to focus on bases. We'll talk about what this means when we get to actually practically building it. But typically this means primary grouping of keys and users and teams. These are bases or like ideas that you're structuring the semantic layer around how people interact with it. You're going to normalize your data over denormalize. Normalization means like you're just going to have a bunch of rows with the like lowest building block you can have, right? Because we're going to rely on the layer to do the aggregations and the joins versus us predefining that in hard tables. Dealing with dates is always annoying. Semantic layer doesn't fix that. And then like you get all the usual benefits of a semantic layer that we've already talked about. I'm going to breeze over this one. We'll just mention the relevant stuff for dbt. dbt cares a lot about entities, which is really cool. That's a big benefit you get because the dbt semantic layer, once you define an entity, which we'll get to later, it will already know the joins. You don't get that in Looker. The dbt times find is cool because then again, dbt semantic layer already knows how to do those joins and all that work. Blah blah blah. So Looker explore. We'll skip over this because there's not many people that care about Looker here. Just kind of summary because Looker is like tied to BI, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to skip. So the meat of the talk, structuring a practical semantic layer. So first, I don't think everyone needs one. I love dbt semantic layer, I think it's cool, but if you like are a small team, if you're not having issues with like definitions and things not lining up, it's just probably not worth you building. Because it is a significant amount of overhead, it is an investment. Something I've had to do at companies is also, it's a balancing the business trade-off versus versus your ego and personal interests, which sucks. But it is always useful, and it preps you really well for scale. So when you do hit issues, you are prepared to do that, and it's more, you can be more flexible in responding to that. All right, my general playbook. I'm breezing through. Any questions here? I'm going to start getting into these. We're going to dive into each of these steps individually, but any questions so far? Cool. All right, so if you take away nothing else from this talk, maybe just take away this. When you're building a semantic layer, you want to get into it. Start small and targeted. It's going to make your life easy. We'll go into detail. What are the metrics and the dims? This is kind of the backbone of what the semantic layer is. Do you want to build fresh tables, like these normalization tables, or can you adapt what you already have? The trade-offs between that. And then you go into developing, testing, validating. That's the black hole of time. Just kind of sync everything into. And then setting up your tools, right? Because that is where people will actually integrate with your layer, even though they are included in steps 2 and steps 1. So step 1, start small and targeted with a single team. Again, I'm trying to make this actual. This is my opinions about just how to start. It's easier to get an org in sales, they call it a champion, once you have somebody who's just really happy, right? I recommend picking the team that has small, easy metrics, so you can start small. It's easier to debug the semantic layer if you hit issues. Somebody who is already data literate on that team, you don't want to also have to teach them how to interpret data as you yourself are building a semantic layer. They should already be a high volume consumer, somebody who is looking at dashboards a lot or doing a lot of queries because you want them to see the value from the layer and also give you feedback where it's not working because you will mess it up and you're going to want that feedback quicker before it ends up at an exec level. Bonus of high visibility of the company leadership team. I know I just said catch for the exec level, but if you do it well and you get a VP on board or a C-suite, life's pretty great. But it is very easy to get rabbit holing, which is again, small, targeted, simple. Okay. The second step, once you've got your team, you've picked them out, you need to decide where the entities, metrics, and dimensions. So what are entities? I'm going to skip ahead. Entities is the concept in dbt semantic model. This is how they describe entities, measures, dimensions, and metrics. Those are the 4 things that are the backbone of this. Entities, I think, are the most important. These are typically the primary keys in a table, right? Your user ID, your organizational ID, pipeline ID. I've worked a lot at a bunch of dev tool companies, whatever that looks like in your actual repo, that's what these are going to be, okay? The measures are going to be mostly numerical. These are things that get aggregated up to. Your dimensions are your usual group by country, product, subscription plan, etc. The measures are different than metrics. This is a trick. This is going to be tricky. But measures will be can also be a metric, but a metric can be made of different measures, right? So active organizations is not a measure, that's a metric, but the number of pipelines run is a measure and a metric. You can have intermediate things, say active users has multiple metrics that feed into it, it's 2 parts, number of pipelines run, and then they need to be a part of another category. You could have that, whatever category, be a measure and not a metric. I know that's confusing. You will figure this out in code. It's just something to be aware of, right? And they have the space numbers or standard number tags on Arrakis, right? But then the metric, it's different. Questions there because I know that's going to be a confusing thing, and I don't have a YAML in front of me. I see some confused faces. It's okay. The more you code, the better you'll get at this. Even me playing around with dbt semantic layer I was having issues with the measure as a metric, and then in the code I want to get the whole thing. But yeah, the entities I think are the most important part, and this is going to be really hard, right? This is where you want to truly be a thought partner with your team, because all of these we like nerding out as data engineering, analytics engineering people, but this is the benefit of the semantic layer is driving it back to business value. What are the questions they are trying to answer? Why are they looking at this dashboard? What's the decision they're trying to make? What is the value they're trying to get from your data? This should be most of your mental energy right here, okay? So they already probably have a dashboard if you pick them because they're data literate, but is that actually what they care about, right? Like say the PM is trying to decide how successful was my feature launch. They're looking at this dashboard. You as the data person, don't just like root translate that. Do those metrics actually make them be able to understand that value? This is part of what you're bringing to the table when you're talking with these teams before you even get into these, right? In the very top bullet, I'm kind of doing bottom up. It's the end user first approach, especially with dbt semantic layer, because it cares so much around metrics, right? The actual thing that's being used to make a decision, like if like I'm exec and I'm like, okay, what's the monthly reoccurring revenue? Like how well are you doing in this segment? Do I want to invest more in this segment or not? That's going to be the metric I'm using to make a decision, right? That's the end user first. I'm not just throwing things at the wall. What is being used to make a decision, or what is needed to make a decision, and making sure that's in the model. Questions? Cool. All right, number 3. All right, so you picked out, you know what your entities are, your metrics, your dimensions, you know what's valuable, you've got your team, you've done that coordination. Now you're looking at your repo. Do you want to build these tables out that you need, or do you want to adapt what you already have? So first things first, I'll just like, do they already have rolled up tables? Do they already have normalized or denormalized tables? You want to look at that. Don't worry if you can't get perfect normalization. Everyone has ideals in mind. You've all seen it, the million LinkedIn influencers, right? You just need something that works for your team, that is not going to bite you in the butt, and that is scalable, okay? So that means if it's useful and usable, go with it. And you don't need to build new tables to have a semantic layer right now. You can to get that nice normalization, which will make it more flexible, but you don't have to. You can go ahead and just build your semantic models, which are YAML files, off tables you already have, right? The power of the semantic layer will come from the normalization, but you don't have to have that to have a semantic layer or find value. Kind of like my personal thoughts around this, and I'm sure there are others in the crowd with more semantic layer experience that also have this, but like, if there's not many tables that they're using to answer their questions, you probably can just adapt. If not from the table they're currently using, like the fact table, maybe an int, a higher upstream table that hasn't been rolled up, pre-aggregated, right? Like if they're using a monthly table, what table is being aggregated up to monthly? Use that one. Use the daily one, okay? And the tables still get pretty much normalized. And build if there's a lot of tables they're coming from, because you probably can simplify that anyways in a normalization table. You don't have to necessarily pull from like 4 or 5 or 6 different tables. So it's kind of a cheat also briefly refactor that. And that will also build if the tables can be easily reused across multiple teams, right? So we're starting small, but the goal is to eventually get everyone at the company, their metrics that you're using as part of your semantic layer. Questions? Cool. All right. The time sync, actually building it. So develop, test, validate. This is where you're gonna get into the weeds. I recommend with the dbt semantic layer, you really want to spend time on the time spine. Dates are a mess. We know they're a mess. They always mess us up. And the time spine, especially in dbt, is powerful because you don't have to go through and tell every single measure or metric of like, I can add this to weekly and monthly and quarterly and yearly. If you have a good time spine in a nicely structured date variable in your semantic model for your tables, you will be able to do these roll-ups that you need to do. So that's why it's worth the investment, but it's tricky, and that's the thing I've been kind of struggling with as somebody who has a dim dates table and has been trying to use that as my time spine. You can also do macros. Both are in the documentation. Just saying that's going to be a place particularly tricky one. Personally, I was doing this locally, but did not have the cloud CLI set up. So don't do that. Make sure that's set up if you're doing local dev. That was very frustrating. AI is useful. There are caveats. I'm not going to cover it here, but we can talk afterwards about my foray is trying to use AI, building out the dbt semantic layer, and things I noticed it was good at and things I noticed it was bad at, because I think most of us here would probably use a little bit of AI at least to try to do this. And then make sure you're validating your models, that they are getting what you want. So for example, you picked your team, they already had the dashboard. The tables that they've been using, your new semantic model tables give you the same numbers. That's it. That's what I mean, mostly validate, right? Just like get that, you can just do it that simply. shameless plug, Recce, we can help do that, and we can help a minute at the CI there. All right, so you've done that. You've coded, everything's up, everything's good to go, happy place. Now you get to set up your tools. The DBT, it's cool. You get to be tool agnostic. It's great. You hate a tool, you switch it out because you own the data. You can just do that. If somebody's working in Google Sheets because you set this semantic layer, they hate your dashboards, right? They come from a consulting background, great. They can use Google Sheets integrates with that. So they can already have their metrics and it will be the same as if they used it anywhere else, right? Saves you, gets rid of the whole problem of why don't these numbers line up, because they are all now using the exact same thing, no matter how it's being aggregated. Make sure as you're setting up the tool that the data is understandable and accessible by your end users. Again, data is the product. This is where they're seeing the product. This might be the most important for them because this is where they'll actually see it. Making sure this is done. So you're gonna want them to dog food, both you and stakeholder. Again, this is why you picked a data literate person, so you don't have to handhold them through this. And you're gonna catch bugs, you're gonna catch ugly things, and that's okay. Just part of the process. No one really talks about that much, but you will. Again, shameless plug for us. But then also, like I love Hex, been a fan of Hex, I think it's great. They have really cool semantic layer stuff, love your ecosystem, and then Speak has been the BI tool I've been playing around with. But Lightdash is also really cool. There's a bunch of them out there, and you get to do that now because the semantic layer you own. You don't have to worry about this. And then you repeat these steps, right? So everything we did, you can just repeat it. I recommend starting, we picked your first team, your second team. Where do the entities overlap? Who also is thinking about users or organizations or pipelines, right? Because you've already built some of those tables out and you can slowly expand those other metrics. High visibility projects and dashboards would be a great opportunity to show value and convince hesitant stakeholders, right? Because you just spent a lot of time doing something that not a lot of people would see large value from. If something major breaks or keeps bugging you, you can also go there next, right? These are just things to think about as you try to pick the next team. And just, again, keep in mind you're building a product for your stakeholders, right? So you, in essence, are doing sales here. Like your metrics are features and each team's a new customer. And then incorporate feedback. Okay. Anything here on the structural stuff? And then we're getting final thoughts, so we're wrapping up. Cool. All right. Just final, semantic layer helps you showcase the full value of your work in your team. It gives you consistency, flexibility, and true ownership of your data. Trust is our bread and butter, and that's what a semantic layer helps get you pretty easily once it's set up. And you treat your staff like a product, not infrastructure, right? You want them to be consuming it, it needs to look good, semantic layer helps with that. Rethinking around your models around metrics will be difficult and kind of brain breaking at first. Coming from Looker, which was more centered around explorers, entities was different, but it is a more metric first approach, which is great long-term and more scalable. Again, the idea is going to be. And you don't need to build a perfect layer all at once. Just start small, 3 metrics, see how it works, slowly expand. Kind of the land and expand, which again is like a sales team, right? Cool. And that's my talk. Thank you all so much. And then, there's my LinkedIn. And then next Tuesday, I'm giving a talk at a virtual conference unrelated to DBT. This one is on measuring invisible products. So I've done a lot of product analytics for dev tools, infrastructure companies, and so it's how do you do product analytics when you can't track users or usage or engagement in traditional ways. Yeah. But any questions about anything we've talked about here, things that you strongly disagree with? These are my opinions and things I've seen work, but not necessarily things that you need to do. I know people will disagree. Cool. Yeah.
Have you experimented at all with federation, like getting users to actually contribute?
No, I've fallen more on when I've tried to get users to contribute, because I worked at Circle CI and Mox, very dev-focused companies, very friendly. It is hard to get them up to speed, and at the same time having them do something valuable when I need to do it myself. So it's just typically faster and keeps it more curated. Yeah. So the right team, maybe, I haven't been able to see it.
Sorry, kind of where you're talking about like shift left movement or?
Almost like shifting, I think of it like shifting right, like can you have individual teams, like you said, moving it to other teams, like you start with one core group, can you set it up in such a way that additional groups can begin contributing their own metrics to the semantic layer in a way that's not onerous on like a centralized BI team?
I think that's, again, the promise. I haven't seen it, not saying you can't do it. I think it's a promise semantic layer, but it needs to be, I think, fairly data literate. Maybe not, could be wrong. Learning here, new grounds. Yeah. Personally, anything you can offload, I love that, but then you risk getting a million metrics, right? That's the problem, probably end up with like 1,000 different tables and no one knows what is in each of them.
I love the presentation and how you frame the problem. Question, when you say focus on showing what, like the high value dashboards, like show the value of having done all of this, still like you're showing a dashboard that people used to see, so hey, remember the old dashboard?
Yeah. So it's not just about seeing like the dashboard, it gets back into that self-servability. So before that dashboard, maybe it was very static. There wasn't much they could do with it. You're now allowing them to do more functionalities. They can add more metrics, they can transform more things, or it's just more trustworthy. Even if it has been working, I have found in my experience, every single like dashboard eventually does break because you're changing active users, engaged users, MRR, there's something there that breaks, even though that should be the most like typical one. So it's trustworthiness, I say, is what you get from like just replicating dashboards if they're not exploring them themselves. PMs like exploring a lot, engineering managers, but execs, it would be trustworthiness. Yeah.
But how does it go from, it's a
This is a good question.
it's a very visible improvement.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I used to complain about the numbers and now I don't complain anymore, so.
Yeah, no, it's a hard. I mean, that's part of like the back end of data. It is like a lot of our work building out trust and making things more reliable isn't seen. It's just felt, right? We don't really get kudos when things work well. We just get blamed when things go poorly, and this is trying to decrease the number of times it goes poorly. Yeah.
It's like, thank you.
Yeah, it's just, you're playing defense, you're not playing offense here. Yeah.
How user-friendly is the semantic layer for the users? I find that in many organizations there is a fight between definitions as well, right? So the same active user can mean very different things for different departments.
Yeah.
Right? And I find that the data dictionary is very important for most of them. And actually I start from this in most of the cases, is defining that and then moving into defining the semantic layer.
Yeah.
So how friendly is it? Like how can they look at what it is? Like how it is defined?
Yeah.
And is it friendly not for the developers? Is it?
So the semantic layer itself, just pure dbt,
Yeah.
that it would be reliant on like your third-party tooling to see it. Also, I just want to call out where he was saying start with the data dictionary and then build the semantic layer. Love that because it gets everyone on board first. I just want to like call that out, like that is awesome. And then it's also the metric first, how like dbt is like the semantic layer is built with that. Semantic layer itself, like just pure dbt, no, not very user-friendly. I would not want to expose that code to people. But once it's set up in like tools, like Steep, for example, has, here's my metrics, here's my dimensions, so you're also want to pair it with a good tool that integrates well with semantic layer. Otherwise, yeah, they're not going to get
And
done.
what is the tool that you choose?
Steep, right now for BI. Yeah. Yes.
How does it integrate into Google Sheets?
I have no idea, but I know it does. It's really cool with like the API connections. It's just like really, it's just really cool what they're doing. Highly recommend checking that out. Yeah. Okay, I saw a question. Yes.
Maybe similar to the previous question, did you have any specific learnings from when stakeholders actually started adopting it? Like, is there a learning curve involved to that?
Yes, so that's going to be more of a learning curve unrelated to the semantic layer, more related to the BI tool, right? Because the semantic layer is just making the BI tool work better and more effectively and giving you more control. Yes, yeah, absolutely. So for example, PMs that are used to writing queries, because maybe they came from a software engineering background, it is going to be really hard to get them out of that. Really, really hard. But you can probably get them out of the Snowflake queries workbook into Hex. right? So they can still write their queries, and then you're like, well, hey, look, this semantic layer, this metric that you keep having to write, you can just click over here and just drop it in there, right? So it's kind of the more soft skills, unfortunately, trying to get them to adopt that. It also, if they've been really struggling themselves with like trying to do different group bys and maybe pinging you, that's where you can start pushing them to the semantic layer, but you're gonna wanna set a harder boundary with the PM. And be like, hey, I built this out, like try using this, and I'll do like a 30-minute training with you, and then just start slapping into that. Yeah. But great question, Dori. Anything over here? All right, cool, well, happy to chat. You got my LinkedIn, you got my email, great questions. I hope y'all took a little something away from it. Yeah, and just thank you so much for coming.